Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat. I'm with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other worlds. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
Welcome, everybody. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen on Studio B at freedomslips.com. Revolution Radio is the network. We do appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening. I had a couple of my listeners inquire about the infancy gospels as in relation to Christ's early childhood, as to why these were not included in the canon, and how in the canon we see only one depiction of a story of when Christ was 12 years old and his parents had mislocated him, and they retraced their steps and found him in the temple having dialogue with all of the rabbis and the priests and the learned men of knowledge there. And they were dumbfounded as to the just the intelligence that he displayed in his knowledge of the gospel and all other things. And so when Mary and Joseph came back, they basically found him schooling those that others look to for guidance on the scriptures. But anyways, we're not given very much detail at all as to the early life of Christ. Another couple of questions that were asked of me just this past week were in association with Mary, her specialness, and also about the virgin birth and how it was that she was a virgin even after the conception of Christ, which is also verified in some of the extra biblical accounts. And so I thought in answering these questions, I would bring on my friend Robert Ferrell, who is the author of the SuperGospel and also runs a website called scriptural-truth.com, which you can go there and find many extra biblical texts, and you can download the PDF copies for free. And there are also many MP3s, and he also has a YouTube account where he reads many of these texts and shares commentary on some of them. But he, like myself, has studied over a large number of years everything that you can find in association to the pseudepigrapha, the apocrypha, the extra biblical and extra canonical texts. And having done so, he's also been led to similar discernment as far as the two seed lines, the enmity, the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, what happened in the garden, and how that beguilement of Eve resulted in the birth of Cain, and also gives validity to other texts like the Book of Enoch and others, which I feel are absolutely inspired. And so we're going to spend the next 2 hours answering those questions that were put forth by some of my listeners, as well as other items of interest in relation to the forgotten, the forbidden, and the lost books of the Bible. And so, Robert, are you with us this evening?
Yes, I am.
All right, brother. Well, I thank you for taking the time to join us, and on such short notice as well, especially with my just having received all of this, all these queries which are related to this particular topic and how it's part of some of the things you've covered in the Super Gospel. And so before we go forward, I'd like you to present your contact information, your websites, also, the other projects you're doing, and where people can go to buy your book, The Super Gospel. And also, after you do that, if you'll talk a little bit about how it is you came to publish the Super Gospel and the efforts that you put forth in bringing it together.
Okay. Well, first of all, as you mentioned, I do have a website which is run by a YouTube friend of mine, Jesus Love 723. He pretty much owns the whole thing from beginning to end, from top to bottom. But on that page, he has provided all kinds of videos, all kinds of audios, MP3s, things that you can download for free, including the Super Gospel. It's something that I make available for free in PDF form as well as MP3 form. And if you go to my YouTube channel, which is Apocryphile 1970, APOCRYPHILE 1970, then you can access them. There are actually read-along versions that you can access, all of them on a playlist. So I've done everything I can to make these things as accessible and as freely available as I possibly can. If you do wish to purchase a hard cover, or I'm sorry, just a regular book edition, everything is in soft cover, but you may. There are links at scriptural-truth.com and probably in the descriptions sections of the videos as well. My primary goal here is to learn the truth and to share the truth. And I just want it to be so that anybody, anywhere, can tune in and in whatever form suits them best. To have the access to what it is that I've discovered. One of the things that I'd like to say, first of all, is I didn't write this to be a book. I didn't write it to be a novel or whatever. It's not really written, actually. It's compiled. It is a synthesis of ancient Christian texts. And the reason why I did it was because I wanted to read the gospel from beginning to end in a single linear harmony. And I wanted to be able to order and to arrange all of the various sources in such a way as you could read them all. And there are probably close to 100 sources. I haven't counted precisely, but if you include not only the books, but various agrapha, which are isolated sayings of Jesus, and you take into account various other references, various things that are attributed to Jesus and everything, it probably adds up to something like 100 different sources, give or take, maybe a dozen or so. So it's very vast and broad in terms of its composition. And I think one of the things that really struck me as interesting about it, probably more so than anything else, was how it all sort of stood as one cohesive story. And the more sources I added, the more sense things tended to make. And one of the things about it was, in its composition, I wanted to be above all as inclusive as possible and as fair as possible. I treated all sources as equally valid. So if you see things in there that may seem controversial or whatever, I made it a point not to make those judgment calls. I made it a point not to make those kinds of decisions. I put what was there in whatever order, in whatever sequence, in whatever context that best befitted. And like any other harmony, of course, you don't have any Christians out there who just believe Matthew or just believe Mark or just believe John or just believe Luke. People look at the Gospels as a collective. And people are used to a little bit of uncertainty as to their ordering. People are used to things like things being, chronologically different, sometimes different with regards to numbers and things like that, genealogies between the Gospels. And so people are used to those kinds of variations. And one of the things that really impressed me in the compiling of all of this information was that even though these texts presented the same kinds of problems and the same kinds of issues as you find in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they were not of a more difficult nature. They were the same kinds of issues of sequence and numbers and things like that. The kinds of things that we've already accepted. So one of the overriding things that I noticed as I was putting it together was that if you accept a certain ambiguity, perhaps, in reading the Gospels, if you accept certain variations or certain problems or certain complications in the Gospels, that it's like it's saying that these kinds of features exist so as perhaps to excuse similar kinds of features in these other Gospels, so that you couldn't play the one against the other, that that you wouldn't hold a double standard, I guess, against the one, as opposed to the other. But you would find that various sources, one would bring something up and another source would sort of continue it, and another source would continue it further, and perhaps even another source would conclude certain arcs in his life, or certain features within a story seemed actually more whole, more complete, and actually more sensible the more you added to it. It was as if, just as we accept that our notion of the gospel would be poorer if we only say had 3 of them, or if we only say had 2 of them, or our notions of the gospel would be poorer if, say, we only had 1 of them. That the same principle that having 4 gospels is an enhancement rather than rather than detracting from the concept of the gospel, is that we realize that the gospel is something that is beyond just the words of one author, or beyond the parameters of just one story, that it took more than one author and it took more than one telling of it to really tell of it. And that what I discovered is that by looking at all of the sources, that they all tended to have this same sort of added dimension to them, that it became, in a sense, grander, it became, in a sense, fuller, but it also became, in a sense, more sensible. And so, as I came to completion of it, I decided to go back into to perfect it, to go over it. And I spent years just going over it, trying to bring out the nuances within it, to try and make things clear, because I wanted to know these things for myself. I was convinced by then, in my own mind, in my own heart, that because of the constant references to extra canonical, and I don't like to say extra biblical texts, because the concept that something is extra biblical implies that it isn't in the Bible. And when you're talking about the Book of Enoch, well, the Book of Enoch actually is mentioned in the Bible, or the various other texts are mentioned in the Bible. Therefore, they are biblical, but they're outside of the canon, and therefore could be more properly understood as extra canonical. But anyway, basically, in a nutshell, I wrote this book, I compiled this book to see what it said. And without imposing my own selection process, my own thought process, I just let the words fall wherever the words wanted to, like anyone else who was compiling a gospel harmony. And so this is what I ended up with. And people encouraged me to publish it and to promote it, which of course I was willing to do. Just like Jesus said, freely you have received, so freely give. And so this is something, I guess, that I'm giving freely to the world for them to enjoy and to study. And, I feel like if you read this particular book from beginning to end, you'll have a far broader understanding of ancient Christendom. than probably anything that you would get from reading these books individually. There's something to be gained from reading it within the bounds of its own parameters. There's something to be gained from trying to learn from each individual author and why they wrote their particular gospel and what it may have been used for, what it may have emphasized or de-emphasized or whatever. But when you look at it as a whole, as an aggregate, it's very much one story. It isn't the disjointed kind of Frankenstein's monster that you might expect. All of which sort of begs the question is, if these books have any inspiration to them, then maybe they were meant to be understood in light of one another. So I feel like on a spiritual level, it's valid for those reasons. That it's a story sort of beyond the story. It's all of the stories together that really properly can be understood as the gospel. And that's kind of where I decided to give it the name the super gospel, not as if it were the uber gospel, the superior gospel, or anything like that, but that it was something beyond just the components, that it was something that stretched beyond the boundaries of their own beginnings and ends or whatever of each individual one. Let
me make a quick comment here. Just so everybody knows as well, Robert, in his efforts, begins with Mary and how her parents, Joachim and Anna, how they were barren and childless for a very long time. And then they were promised a child that would be spoken about and revered even, until all the ages of the world. But I want to make mention real quick just some of the texts that are found in the Super Gospel, because a lot of these are texts that not many people have heard about, unless, like myself, you are a student of all of the extra texts that you can find. And with the advent of the internet, we can really keyword search and look to try to find a lot of these texts. But even then, unless you know about them, you can't, really even look them up. And so this Super Gospel is a great resource for people that are interested in study of many other wisdom texts. And so I'm going to read just some of the ones that are found, excerpts that are found within this. 1 Corinthians, 1 Peter, 1 Thessalonians, 2 Baruch, 2 Clement, 2 Esdras, 2 Peter, the Acts of Andrew and Matthias, Acts of Andrew, Acts of John, Acts of Peter, Acts of Thaddeus, Acts of the Apostles, the Anaphora Polate, Apocalypse of Peter, the Arabic Infancy Gospel, the Latin Infancy Gospel, Ascension of Isaiah, the Birth Nativity of Mary, Clement of Alexandria, Clement Homilies, the Decentius, Latin A and B, the Dialogue of the Savior, Dialogue of Justin with Trypho, the Egerton Gospel, Epistle of Agbar, the Epistle of the Apostles, Gospel of the Ebionites, Gospel of the Egyptians, Gospel of the Hebrews, Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of the Nazarenes, Gospel of Nicodemus, Gospel of Philip, Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of Thomas, History of Joseph the Carpenter, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, Ignatius of Antioch to the Ephesians, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas in Latin, the Gospel of John, the Life of John the Baptist by Serapion, Gospel of Luke, Gospel of Mark, Gospel of Matthew, the Odes of Solomon, the Protevangelion of James, the Papyrus of Oxyrhynchus, Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew, Questions of Bartholomew, the Gospel material preserved in the Quran, the Book of Revelation, the Apocalypse of John, Epistle of Paul to the Romans, the Sibylline Oracles, the Secret Book of Mark, the Traditions of Matthias. All these and many others are also included within this text. All right, continue
on. Well, you see what I mean by I didn't make judgment calls about the sources that I used, and I used as wide a variety of sources as were available. And I think you can see that basically. That's just a thumbnail of the books that are included. That really doesn't include all of the many different citations, the patristic citations, the agrapha, and various other bits and pieces. To you know, those were just the books that I actually had abbreviations for. The other ones I spelled out. I encourage you, if you're going to follow along with this, I encourage you to go right now to the scriptural-truth.com website, and you can download a free PDF of this, and you can follow along as we talk about it. It's there for you to download for free, and you can see the list of abbreviations. You can see all of the different sections. I was very careful to put headings under every section, so you can just open up to a heading that you find interesting and read, and the sources are listed there. And as far as was possible, I put the geographic information there, so where it was, or where where whatever the events are in that particular section take place. And so if you want to go ahead and do that, I suggest you do it now so that you can follow along. But it is comprised of well more than what you see there in just that short list of abbreviations. But it gives you some concept of just how far and wide I went to try and find authentic Christian tradition with regards to this. And so for all of those various sources to hang together, I think the way they do. And I think when you read the book, having those sources, you can always look those up yourself. You can always double check and make sure that, I did it accurately and faithfully. Because this isn't something that just came off the top of my head. It's not like the Aquarian gospel or other kinds of things where people have visions or whatever. This is studied. This is from sources integrated into a cohesive whole. And so it is what you would expect it to be. It's the kind of thing, and I put it together with this in mind. If you had basically two basic rules, that you were going to be all-inclusive and that you were going to treat all things as though they had equal validity, that you could probably produce, given a good 5 to 10 years of effort, you could probably produce largely the same book as this. And so just read it and understand it with that basic paradigm in mind. I didn't make the judgment calls. I wanted everything to emerge from that, just to see if there was any validity to the fact that all of these books had validity, and whether all of them actually had a piece to contribute to our understanding. And to me, that was the only way that we would ever know for sure, was to try and force them to work together.
All right, let me make one other comment here before we go to the first break. For those that do have access to the chat room, I did post a link to Robert's YouTube account, and specifically to a video, 16 hours of him reading the SuperGospel. And so you can catch every bit of it on YouTube freely. You don't have to go purchase the book. I myself have, because I like to read, and to have a hard copy, and I like to read outside in the sunshine and not, just have to read from my computer, because I do enough of that already. And so, but for those that are interested, I also posted a link, and I'll do so again, to the SuperGospel on Amazon, because you can also find it there. And as I said, it's an incredible, especially for those that haven't studied the Bible in large degree. If you want to get the full story without having to jump back and forth between the pages, and you want to know specifically about Christ, including all aspects of his life, from the time that he was conceived, as an infant, as a young child, and growing up through his teen years, to the time that he was anointed for ministry, and then his death and resurrection, and finally his ascension. And also in the Super Gospel, there's an inclusive look at the end of days, the apocalypses, and the, like the Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21 references as to the times of the end and what would be happening when he is to return again. And so um, very full summation of his life. And what I think is also very important is the chapters preceding that of the birth of Christ, having to do with Mary, and also the stories which detail Joseph and how he was an elderly widowed man, and how he uh, had children from a previous marriage, because we know in the Gospels, in the canon, we're told that Christ had brothers and sisters, and we assume that Joseph and Mary had sexual relations and they had children other than Christ, but this is not true. In fact, Mary was a virgin even after the conception of Christ, which the Immaculate Conception, which is further verification as to her specialness, but also that of her child. And so those things are portrayed also within some of the infancy Gospels. And we'll talk about that when we come back from the first break. But before we get to the break, Robert, again, your website and your contact information.
Okay, again, the website is scriptural-truth.com. And my YouTube account is Apocryphile1970. That's APOCRYPHILE 1970. That's also I'm also available on Facebook if you want to find me. My name is Robert Ferrell. That's Ferrell. So I do kind of make myself available. It is a little overwhelming sometimes, and unfortunately I can't get to everybody. But if you're persistent, or you're sincere and whatnot, I'll do my best to get to y'all. But if you want to have access to as much material as you possibly can, I suggest going to scriptural-truth.com first.
All right, we'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody. And I thought with this part, this 30-minute segment, that we could answer some of those questions that were put forth and that were specific to some of the information that are in the early chapters of the Super Gospel. Namely, can you relate to us the story of Joachim and Anna, not in great detail, but leading up to Mary's, how special Mary was, how she was given to the temple, and how when she was 14 they tried to betroth her, wanted her to get married, like all the other temple virgins or virgins of Israel, and how it was that Joseph came to be picked for this guardian position because he didn't want to marry her, and also she was 14 when he had already been widowed. And if you would make mention, if you can remember, as to who his wife was, any of the names of his children, the previous children that he had, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, well, basically the story starts out like this. This is something that, and I have no denomination whatsoever. I'm probably an abomination to any denomination that's out there based on my beliefs. But you will find that some of this in Orthodox tradition, even in Catholic tradition, they do preserve stories in their traditions about Anna and Joachim as being the actual parents of Mary. Mariology figures prominently, of course, in Catholicism, but long story short, Anna and Joachim are an older couple, a little bit akin to Zachariah and Elizabeth. They've grown old without children, and so they keep going to the dedication feast every year in Jerusalem and making this pledge to God that if they're given a child, be it either a boy or a girl, that they would dedicate it to the temple in Jerusalem. And so year after year after year, they'd go to the temple in Jerusalem, and they would have to face ridicule from their the priests there, and also the people there. They looked down on them because they didn't have children. And finally, Joachim is expelled. The basic gist of it is, how dare you, having no children or whatever, appear before all of us who do. And of course he's humiliated. Of course he doesn't want to face his family, doesn't want to face his friends. So he goes running off out into the wilderness with his sheep and his herds and his shepherds and whatnot. And he says, you know what, for 40 days and for 40 nights, that my only food will be prayer or whatever. And so while all that is going on, an angel visits Anna, who is Mary's mother, at their home, and announces to her that, well, of course, Anna is despondent as well. She's lost Joachim. She doesn't know where he is. She's despondent. She wishes for death. And an angel appears to her, and he says that, you will have a child, and it will be a girl, and you will name her Mary. And so it gives her this added significance in a way, like John the Baptist might have had, or Jesus had, where the name is given, the announcement is given, and all of that. So she has a certain status, based on these sources. And these sources are, say, the Protevangelion is one of them. Pseudo Matthew is another one of them. There are a number of infancy gospels. The birth of Mary, for example, sometimes called the Nativity of Mary. And there are various other sources that you'll find a lot of this material in. So if you want to check against it, you can always find it there. I've listed the sources that I've used under the headings of each particular section. And so you'll be able to research those things on your own, and of course, find them on your own. But an angel appears to Anna and tells her that she's going to have a baby, and another angel appears to Joachim. And after a little bit of going back and forth, because neither one of them can believe it and all that, they're told that they need to meet at the Golden Gate, which is in Jerusalem. And they're told just exactly where and when to meet. And so Anna goes there and waits and waits and waits and waits and waits. And lo and behold, she sees Joachim, coming in the distance with his droves of sheep. And they meet at the gate. And what you spoke of before as the Immaculate Conception, this is actually in Catholic tradition, the meeting there where Joachim, and Joachim and Anna meet up and they hug. That's supposedly when the Immaculate Conception took place. Actually, that's not something that the text supports. The actual text, when you weigh them all and balance with one another, it states that she was already pregnant when Joachim left. And so in a sense, he left for no reason, because if he had just waited around, they would have had Mary at the time. And so anyway, long story short, everybody finds out that she's pregnant in her old age, and they know that this is by the hand of God, of course, because how would such a person or whatever become pregnant at such an old age and everything. And so instead of everybody shaming them or whatever, they celebrate them, and everybody's all happy and everything. And so, of course, true to her word, whenever Mary is born, she makes a little sanctuary, out of her room. She makes it so that nothing unclean or unholy or whatever enters into her room. And so when she's 3, they were supposed to hand her over to the to the temple there in Jerusalem, where she would be basically a virgin raised in the house of God. And so the whole time she's there, there's this whole thing about how she's wiser than all the rest, and she can sing better than all the rest, and she was very careful about the things that she would do and say so as not to offend the rest. And that other people would eat the food or whatever that was there that was given to them, but Mary was fed literally by the hand of an angel, and she spoke with angels and whatnot. So and of course, when there's a lot to this story, a lot of little details. I mean, not to detail it to death, but it's a significant thing because when she's taken to the temple, priests, for example, when she was young in her presentation, they prophesied about her that she will become, a great and a mother great beyond all mothers and whatever, and so they make this prophecy about her, and so later on, when she's young, for example, she's so far in advance of everybody that she could, that when she goes to the temple to climb up the stairs or whatever to do the ascents or whatever, apparently there's some kind of ritual or something that they do, and she went through that ritual and ascended all the way up to the top, just like a graduate would, or like a fully grown, fully trained, fully prepared person would, or whatever. And the priest took her in his arms or whatever, and blessed her and said this proclamation over her or whatever. So basically, as time goes on, she starts to approach, the age of 12 years, and people are concerned that she's going to pollute, if you will, the temple by becoming a woman, if you know what I mean. In other words, that she would reach the age of childbearing, and that she wouldn't be allowed in the temple, and so they want to marry her off so as not to do this. So she presents them with the problem, because even though all the other girls there in the temple are eager to get married and are eager to take on a husband, Mary says that she wants to remain a virgin. And so she's very insistent about this. And the priests there in the temple don't want to have any of it. They're worried about her, eventually polluting the temple. And so they want to get her out of the temple. And so at first they send her off to Joseph, who is a widower. It doesn't mention in the sources that I have the history of Joseph the carpenter or the birth of Mary. That it doesn't mention her mother's name. What it mentions about her mother is that that she was a righteous woman who was bent on holiness in all that she did, and that she passed away. But that Joseph, had already sons whose names were Judas, Justus, James, and Simon, and also 2 daughters whose names were Assia and Lydia. So it does mention 2 sisters of Jesus by Joseph. So and the brothers, of course, where we read in the canonical Gospels. And so Joseph, of course, he's old, he's elderly, he's already raised up children. He doesn't see any point in getting married again. I mean, she's so much younger. How could he raise kids again? He's worried about his reputation. He's worried about being a laughing stock and so on, because it's kind of an odd couple. But he just takes her as his ward at first. And then a couple years later, basically through the same process or whatever, Mary is ordered to wed, and then they conduct this test where everybody brings in their rod to the priests, and so all the eligible men of Judea or whatever bring their rods to the priest. The priest takes them all up and presents them in the temple, says the prayer, and an angel tells him, well, he goes back out and he gives them back to everybody else, and he holds Joseph's rod back, I think probably because he doesn't want to give it. He doesn't want Joseph to have to like, I don't know, maybe they had an arrangement or something. But again, they do it again, And the angel is like, why did you not give Joseph back his rod? And so he at the instigation of the angel caves and gives the rod back to Joseph. And there was supposed to be this sign where a bird would land, a dove would land on the rod of whoever it was that was supposed to take Mary as wife. And of course, the dove flew onto Joseph's rod, and then flew off of it. And so everybody knew that Joseph was the one to marry Mary. And so reluctantly he takes her, without touching her or whatever, without knowing her, so to speak. And he goes off to do some building work up in Capernaum. And so that's when you have the Annunciation. That's where you have the Holy Spirit impregnating Mary. And so Joseph comes back over the course of time, and one of the priests notices that he notices that Mary is pregnant, and he starts accusing her, of course, of being having slept around on him or whatever, because he knows it isn't his. And and then one of the other priests notices it, because he wants to know where Joseph's been or whatever. And he sees Mary pregnant, and so he goes and he reports it to the high priest. And they're all brought before the priest, like a tribunal or something, and they're judged before them, and they're put to the test. Like they have to do this test where they drink the water or whatever, and if they drink the water, then the sin will show in their face. And so Joseph is tested first, and he does the test, and the sin doesn't show in his face. And so they're like, okay, we know that you're innocent of this. So they bring Mary up there, and they start accusing her, of course, in front of the people, saying, well, Joseph has been cleared with regards to this pregnancy. What do you have to say about it? And she stands up, very boldly proclaims that she has never done such a thing. She's never even thought to do such a thing, that she's so above and beyond such a thing or whatever. So they give her the water of testing as well, and then no guilt shows in her face. She doesn't have that sign that's supposed to show up if she's guilty. And so everybody was sort of like, what do we do? It didn't, the sign of guilt didn't show in him, and the sign of guilt didn't show in her. And so they basically let them both off. And so, again, everybody who was against them, everybody who was cursing them or whatever, accusing them, kind of shuts them up. And so they lead them all back home. And that's kind of how that whole thing plays out.
All right, I want to interject a story here from the Protevangelion of James, which is a very interesting accounting. And, this is one of the secrets that I find written all over, not only the Old and New Testament, but also in the extra canonical text, the extra biblical text. And so, for those that haven't heard this, it'll be of great interest. It says this: and she was in her 6th month, and behold, Joseph came back from his building, and entering into his house, he discovered that she was big with child. And he smote his face, and he threw himself on the ground upon the sackcloth, and wept bitterly, saying, with what face shall I look upon the Lord my God? And what prayer shall I make about this maiden? Because I received her a virgin out of the temple of the Lord, and I have not watched over her. Who is it that has hunted me down? Who has done this evil thing in my house, and defiled the virgin? Has not the history of Adam been repeated in me? For just as Adam was in the hour of his singing praise, the serpent came and found Eve alone and completely deceived her, so it has happened to me also. And so, interestingly enough, the Protevangelion of James also gives the assertion that what happened in the garden with the beguilement of Eve, that the serpent as the Nakash, as the winged snake, the feathered serpent, the guardian of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that beguilement was a seduction, and a seduction which resulted in Eve becoming impregnated with Cain, who was the firstborn son of the devil, a scion of the serpent. And that Joseph is relating that basically everybody knows that that's what happened to Adam, and so it's not something that was of new as far as knowledge to those living back in his day and age, because all of them knew the history of Adam, and that the beguilement of Eve was the serpent, the Nakash, seducing Eve and impregnating her with Cain. And that's why Cain was not like, as far as natured or inclined after the nature of Adam, and also why it says in Genesis chapter 5, verse 3, that Seth, after he was born, he was a replacement for Abel, and that he was born in the similitude and likeness of Adam, meaning that there was something obviously different about Cain, and that his resemblance and his nature was not after his stepfather, Adam's, who many people believe was his father. And so this is another one of those verses, and that is confirmation to me as far as the premise of the whole book that I wrote, Lucifer, Father of Cain. And so let me ask you, Robert, when it was, and then we'll get back to the text, because I want to cover the Immaculate Conception and how it is that we know that that Mary was a virgin even after the Immaculate Conception of Christ. But how was it when you were led to this discernment as far as the two different bloodlines and the enmity that would play out, even with the parable, Matthew 13, the parable of the sower, the enemy that snuck into the garden that sowed the tares, and how in the parable of the wheat and the tares it says that the devil is the father of the tares, let both grow up until the end, until the angels as reapers are sent out to gather the tares for burning, but the wheat for the barn.
Okay. Well, first of all, there are ancient traditions that speak to that do indicate that and clearly Joseph here is familiar with those traditions. By saying, has the same thing happened to me? To knowledge and intimacy, if you will, are kind of used interchangeably. Adam knew his wife, Eve, and that kind of thing. So knowledge and fornication or whatever, or sex, are kind of they're sort of used, in similar. There's similar terminology with reference to them both. Mainly when you look at 1 John chapter 3 verse 12, there's an indication that was John's belief as well. It says that not as Cain, who was of that wicked one, and slew his brother. And wherefore slew he him? Because his own works were evil and his brother's righteous. Marvel not, my brethren, if the world hate you. So when you think about it, it implies that there is this other seed line, and that it starts with Cain, and that they are of the world, that they wanted to make the world in their image. And again, you see that after that, of course, when the sons of God in chapter 6 of Genesis come down, and they mix with the daughters of men, that was not, it shows that it's possible for that to be done. And of course, the book of Enoch, it speaks to that rather extensively, about the fallen angels coming down and seducing the women.
Right. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Studio B, and that we come to you every Wednesday evening from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. I do want to remind everybody that Revolution Radio is the largest listener-supported, commercial-free, and corporate-free radio network found anywhere on the internet and anywhere on the planet. And that in order for us to continue coming to you in the ways that we do, covering all the esoteric aspects of truth from biblical prophecy and the written word to the conspiratorial side of what's going on with the Matrix, the Illuminati, the New World Order, then please, those of you that can, do support us monetarily. That we also appreciate all the time and the fellowship that you share in supporting the various hosts and the various programs on both Studio A and Studio B. Most of the days of the week, 7 days a week, and most of the hours of the day. That without you, we certainly could not um, effort and create a platform of truth in the way that we have, and that it's taken the dedication and also the persistence, the voluntary service of many, many individuals like myself, and in fellowship with you, the dialogue, the Q&A, that to become the success that we have become. So those of you that can, go to freedomslips.com and donate. You'll find in the chat room that there's a donate button on the left of the chat room, and it's very easy to do so. One of the easier and more beneficial ways of supporting the network is to subscribe to the archives, and then you can download in MP3 form all of the shows from all of the hosts going all the way back to January of last year. And so, with that, we're going to continue with where we had left off as far as speaking about Mary, um, and also talking, about the sons of God and the enmity between the seed lines. But I'm going to give you a chance, Robert, and for those that don't know that have just joined us, Robert Ferrell, the author of the SuperGospel, and also his website is scriptural-truth.com. You can find his work on YouTube under Apocryphile 1970, and um, I'm going to give you a chance to finish your thought as to what you were speaking on before we went to break, and then if you would talk about the how it was that there was confirmation that Mary was a virgin even after the Immaculate Conception of Christ. We'll speak a little bit about some of the infancy stories, not all of them, and then we'll go into your latest projects, and some of the things that you're involved in now.
Okay. Well, first of all, the story of the birth of Christ is actually comprised of, I would have to count something like 12 different sources. I mean, as you can probably imagine, as far as gospels and infancy gospels are concerned, they're not going to leave out the birth of Christ. So this is a very long and sort of complicated section, but to kind of put it in a nutshell, of course, it follows the story largely of Luke and of Matthew, how they have to go to Jerusalem for the census, and how along the way Mary, of course, is seated on a donkey, and so as they're on their way, an angel appears to them and tells them that her time is at hand, and that there is a cave, and so they find the cave there. He takes Mary off of the donkey that she's riding on, and they enter into the cave. And the cave, as soon as they enter into it, it lights up. It's just infused with light, so long as she is in there. And anyway, so Joseph apparently sees the need for going and finding midwives. So he's consumed with going and finding a midwife for Mary. And he's surprised to see one coming down from Jerusalem to the cave where they are. And so what had happened was an angel had appeared to this midwife and announced to her that there was going to be a miraculous birth, and that she should just stop what she's doing and go on down there. And so anyway, so she meets with Joseph, and they do this whole interaction where she asks him, is she your wife? And he kind of dances around the subject. He says, well, she's my betrothed or whatever. And so they go into the cave together, and immediately Joseph goes out to seek for other midwives for whatever reason. And while he's out and about, the birth of Jesus takes place. Now, you know how in the book of Hebrews it talks about how we have a high priest who ascended through the heavens, and it speaks of Jesus coming down through the heavens. Well, this is one of those references to extra canonical materials. Paul, or whoever the author of Hebrews is alluding to a book called The Ascension of Isaiah. And the book of Hebrews also mentions the ascension of Isaiah later on in chapter 11, just incidentally, where he talks about how others were sawn in half, because in the ascension and martyrdom of Isaiah was sawn in half. So it's pretty clear, in other words, that the author of Hebrews is familiar with this book. And so I use that section of Jesus coming down through the heavens. So what is alluded to in the book of Hebrews is actually spelled out in the ascension and martyrdom of Isaiah. So you see Jesus coming down through each of the heavens. And as this is happening sort of simultaneously with Mary in the cave. That Joseph is out wandering around looking for more midwives. And all of a sudden, as Jesus is entering into the earthly realm, you start to see time literally grinding to a halt. It tells of sheep who are drinking water, and all of a sudden they stop drinking, and you see people eating, and all of a sudden they stop eating. It's as if time literally stands still. The birds are still, the trees are still, everything is still, and the whole world, as Jesus is coming down into the cave where Mary is, to come out of her, or whatever, that everybody is expecting that this is the end of the world. And so basically he's born as light, and the way that the story goes, it kind of explains it as something that's too deep and too mysterious, I guess, for the human mind to comprehend just what has happened. But the gist of it is she remains a virgin even after his birth. And so Joseph manages to scare up a couple of midwives, one of them being Salome. And she is sort of incredulous. She cannot believe that the child has come forth and that Mary is still a virgin. So she essentially checks her out. I mean, does an exam, if you will. And so you can kind of see why maybe some of your more sensitive viewers wouldn't, want this in their Bible. But basically the accounts of the midwives are pretty ubiquitous in these infancy gospels. They tell of this, him being born in a cave. And again, a lot of this stuff was passed down in Catholic iconography. You'll still find sometimes, if you go looking, especially some of the older images, you'll see Jesus being born in a cave. You'll see Jesus and the ox and the donkey and everything. They're in a cave. It's an ancient tradition. It's something that was believed and was part of our Christian heritage for centuries. So the idea that Mary is this perpetual virgin, or that she gave birth and yet remained a virgin, and that Jesus, of course, when he was born, he was pure light, and he was literally weightless. Like, they were passing him around like he weighed nothing. And the midwife recounts this story about how amazed she was when she saw it. She couldn't believe it. It was something completely new, but Salome, in testing her, her finger starts to burn, and she starts to repent and to beg forgiveness for her unbelief and everything. And of course, she's healed, and she immediately wants to go out there and start telling everybody. And an angel stops her and says, don't tell anybody, whatever, about this. But she promises to serve him all the rest of her life, as a result. But yeah, his birth in this whole thing, based on all of those different sources, is just phenomenal. It's very full of the miraculous.
Yeah, and another one of the things that I think is interesting about the story and the way that you present it is that not many people are familiar with the ascension of Isaiah, and where Isaiah is taken up. And you have to remember that Isaiah is one of the Old Testament prophets that foretells the coming of Christ and how he would be born of a virgin and how his name would be Emmanuel, and all these things are written about him many hundreds of years in advance. And so, in the ascension of Isaiah, Isaiah is taken up to the heavens in order to be witness to, given a vision of Christ descending down through the seven heavens, and how he would then be birthed as a child, take as God incarnate, come into the flesh and become a child of Joseph and Mary. And he's even shown how he would later be start his ministry and be crucified on the cross, and how he would then rise again in authority, because the fallen angels didn't know that he was descending down through the seven heavens, and nobody knew that he was coming to be born into flesh form, but that once he is crucified and he's resurrected and he takes his seat at the right hand of the Father, he rises in full glory and with full authority. And then the angels recognize, because they know who their Lord is and who is the light of light and the King of Kings. And so all of that shows and verifies to us that Christ was no ordinary child. Even with like the next part that we're going to talk about, how even as an infant, all the things that are associated with him, his swaddling clothes, bath water, how they had miraculous power to heal anything that was associated to him. Somebody just holding him, hugging him, that they could be healed. And how he knew even as a child, that it also speaks about how when he was born that he spoke to his mother. And so this is no ordinary human being, no ordinary child, and that everything about him was special, and that there was even so many hundreds of prophecies in association with his coming, even to the point where his in the stars, the sign and the sun, the moon, and the stars, how all of that had to been relayed and established with the unfolding of creation in order to confirm his immaculate conception, and also the death and the resurrection, because there were also signs and celestial phenomena associated with that, and only God could foreordain all of those things. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the infancy stories, the infancy gospels, and how we knew that he was special even as an infant, as a young child.
Well, okay. You talked about the swaddling cloths and the backwater cures. Let me see if I could just find one here that's short enough to relate. Sort of as an infant, he's treated almost as an object. That it's like you touch him or he touches something or whatever, and then you're healed. And then as he gets older, he starts adding, dialogue and whatever, and he's a little more active in it. like an example of this, of bathwater cures. It says, now there was this leprous woman who came to the mother of Jesus, Our Lady St. Mary, and pleaded, help me, my lady. What kind of assistance are you seeking? St. Mary inquired. Will you ask for silver or gold, or would you have your leprosy cured? Who can do this thing for me? The woman asked. Just wait until I have bathed my son Jesus and put him down to rest, she said, and the woman waited as advised. And after Mary had laid Jesus down to sleep, she gave her some of the water she had used to wash his body and said, take some of the water and pour it over yourself. And when the woman had complied, she received her cleansing, and so praised God, thanking him with all her heart. Now, okay, so but I mean the thing about this is you've got to kind of understand it a little bit on the parabolic level. The water is the word of God, and once the water is poured over Jesus, who is the Logos or whatever, once this takes place or whatever, it's able to heal her disease of the flesh, her leprosy. So when you think of the symbolism here, you're understanding that by adding water, if you will, to the Logos, by adding scriptures, in other words, to the body of scriptures that we accept, which is essentially the Logos, in other words, it becomes able to cure the disease of the flesh. In other words, what it's basically saying, if you read between the lines here, is that once we add scriptures to it, or once we cleanse, if you will, the Logos with these other scriptures. In other words, once we accept these other scriptures, then we are able to heal the fleshly understanding, if you will, of the, you know what I'm saying? So all of these things that they're doing have a certain symbolism to it. And that's why you have to look at the meanings of these things and what they mean. But yeah, in a nutshell, there are lots of things. And just to touch back on what you were mentioning earlier about Isaiah and how he went up to heaven, I just wanted to interject. To be shown things in advance. Lest any of that seem a little too far out to you, you have to remember, think back to the Mount of Transfiguration, where you had Jesus on the mountain along with James, Peter, and John. But there is Elijah who is there and in that place and time, and there is Moses who was also there, transported across time to actually speak directly with Jesus. And Luke lets us know that they were speaking to them about the what was going to happen to Jesus in Jerusalem. So in other words, it's clearly in our canonical tradition that prophets were transported across time. Even Jesus says this of Abraham. He says, look, Abraham saw my day and he rejoiced. So the prophets are experiencing future events. They're seeing them, they're witnessing them, they're getting these things firsthand. So when they're writing in their scriptures, when they go back to their day, you see Moses coming down the mountain after having seen the face of God, and he's still in his glory, because presumably he's come straight from the Transfiguration back to his time. This is like time travel in the Bible, which it's something that we already accept, but it's not something that we emphasize, and it's not always a connection that we make. But this is what seems to be happening with the prophets. They seem to travel across time. John in the book of Revelation, those kinds of things. So they seem to have these transports. So this is something that we know and we accept just in ordinary Christendom. But the whole story of Jesus' childhood, one of the things that you've probably heard is, that Jesus, occasionally would kill somebody. And these stories have always been problematic. And again, you can see why these books didn't maybe make the cut, because people don't want to hear these kinds of things. But what you have to look at when you're looking at these stories, the way that he would talk back to his teachers, for example, the way that he might, if somebody came up to him and hit him, he might say to them, may you go no further on your path, and that they would just drop dead. If you see that everything that he's doing has this parabolic aspect to it. In other words, if somebody goes against Jesus, who is the Logos, and attacks the Logos, right? It means something much broader than just what is happening there in the scene. That scene is representative of what happens to people when they attack the Word of God, what happens to people when they attack the truth of God, is that they themselves become cursed because of their own actions, and it's an invariable result of what happens to you when you come against the Logos. And when you attack the Logos, that you yourself will wither and die, because it is the Logos that gives you life, whereas it is the letter or the traditions or whatever that bring you death. And so all of these incidents aren't really Jesus being bratty or ill-behaved or any of those things. They're pictures of spiritual truths. And that's how the early Christians, I'm sure, would have understood these things, being that the truth had not been completely eradicated at that point. So, there are myriad stories. I mean, there's so many things. It's hard to even go into them. I could talk about maybe some of the shorter ones of them, but I mean, it's just story after story after story of things that are parabolic in meaning. When Jesus,
we're
I'm sorry,
almost to break, Robert. So let me just make a comment, and then we'll pick up on the other side. One of the things that is interesting to me about the infancy gospels is for those that are only want to study the canon and believe anything outside of that is irrelevant. Well, it's only in the infancy gospels, the pseudepigraphal text, that you're going to find any detail as to when Christ was a babe or when he was young in his life. And that in the canon, there's only one mention when he was 12 years old, and then everything else is left blank. And then to be followers of Christ and disciples of Christ, myself, I want to know everything I can find out about him and his life and the things that made him who he was, and how he was God incarnate, and all these special prophecies that are connected to his coming into the flesh, all of those things. And so all of these people that, judge all of the extra biblical texts without ever having even read them, this just makes no sense to me at all, especially if they're going to be disciples of Christ and can call themselves Christians, and yet they don't want to know anything about the early life of Christ and all of the other information that is connected to who he was, what made him who he was, and that cannot be found in the canon. Just makes no sense. We'll be right back for final segment. Welcome back, everybody, for final segment. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen, and we have as guest with us this evening Robert Ferrell, the author of the SuperGospel. And while he's speaking, I will put contact information as far as his website, where you can buy his book on Amazon, and also his YouTube account, so that you can, if you desire to listen to the Super Gospel being read by him over 16 hours of time. And so, Robert, before we continue, give out your website information, contact information, where people can go to buy your books.
Okay. Well, first of all, everything pretty much that I have that's available is available either at scriptural-truth.com, including links to where you can buy a hard copy if you like. you can always link from there to purchase one if you want one. Again, you have the free MP3s, you have the free videos, you have the free PDF of the Super Gospel if you want to read it for yourself and research this on your own. My other primary site is my YouTube site, which is Apocryphile 1970. That's APOCRYPHILE 1970. So pretty much anything that I have that's available is going to be one or the other of those two places. I pretty much, if I make something, I make it available. So you'll see there's tons of stuff there for you to download if you want. Any of the links that you're going to need or whatever, they're going to be probably on the scriptural-truth.com website. So pretty much that's my hub. But speaking of what you were talking about before we went on break, I kind of wanted to give my 2 cents about that before we moved on.
Sure.
I'll try to make it quick. I mean, clearly when you read Matthew, and especially when you read Luke makes it very clear that he's compiling from source material. And we know that, for example, that when he's speaking as to these infancy gospels and he's using source materials, right? What it implies is that there are all of these infancy stories floating around. The fact that Matthew's infancy story is a little bit different from Luke's kind of gives you some idea that these
Robert, you there? Okay, I think he kind of lost contact. Robert, if you hear me, just give a shout out when you return back. In the meantime, I'm going to answer a question by Mur Bailey. In the chat room, he asks, why does no one address where Christ was between Jerusalem as a youth, instructing elders, and his baptism and possibly his travels to the Far East? There are rumors and there are also sources that cite that Christ possibly may have been traveling in the Far East, and there are accounts of a Saint Isa, which are supposedly related to his having gone to the East and having taught and also, shared information with the elders out that way. I have read several books about that, and whether there's any, certainly seems that there could be some truth to all of that, but it is interesting to me that there is no, written account besides the infancy gospels as to where he was from 12 to 33, and how he just again appeared on the scene. And so that is interesting to say the least. Robert, are you there, brother? We're not hearing him for some reason. Are you there? I heard you for half a second. Okay, maybe his mic is just not plugged in or something. Check your mic connections if you can hear me, brother. Yeah, let me see. If he dropped off, I can... Okay, he dropped off, so I'm going to try to bring him on again. And then we'll continue. Let me see if I can find him. Alright. Hold on, everybody. I'll see if I can bring him back on. Hey, you there?
I'm there.
Okay. All right. You dropped off. You went mute for a second and then came back. But I'm going to let you finish up what you were saying as far as, and then also if you would give a comment on what you think about the Nag Hammadi codices, because that's come up twice in the chat room as well.
Okay. Well, what I'm saying is that the fact that it seems as though Luke is choosing from a source material that he has at his disposal in order to compose the Gospel of Luke. And you see these various infancy stories, one of them being, of course, Jesus in the temple at the age of 12. speaking to the priests there in the temple and teaching them things, it implies that there, at the time of the writing of the Gospel of Luke, that there is all of this source material that is in existence, and that explains, in a way, the seeming paucity of other stories, other infancy gospel stories, like as if to say, I don't really have to enumerate all of this stuff. I don't have to go through it all here. I don't have to represent it all, because it's all pretty well in widely in circulation, and that it's something that you can go look elsewhere, perhaps, for these stories. The usual explanation is that that people just went buck wild with Matthew and Luke, and created all of these crazy, fantastical, fictitious, perhaps, stories about Jesus. When in fact, the fact that they're not using a whole lot of these stories or whatever implies that they don't need to, because they're already widely in circulation. Clearly, they're somewhat in circulation by virtue of the fact that Luke is, because he says at the beginning of his gospel, he says, for as much as many have taken in hand to put forth a narrative regarding matters which have been proven to our satisfaction, whatever. And he's saying that he's going to.
You're starting to drop out again, Robert. I hope we don't lose you. Okay, it looks like we have lost Robert again. And so I will try to bring him on again if he drops off completely. But at least this one didn't happen until the very end of the show. And so, anyways, let me address again the question. There is a book out there. It's called The Lost Years of Jesus. One of the texts that I read that spoke about his possibly having gone east and having learned and taught also with the masters out there, the different individuals that are well versed in some of the secret knowledge and the hidden teachings that are obviously escape the mundane as far as our modern society and the realities that we live in and deal with. We don't even place an emphasis on the kingdom or a focus on, like prayer, and the knowledge as far as the law of attraction, both karma and dharma, putting out energy and then having it multiplied and brought back upon you. All right, let me see if I can get Robert again. We might not be able to get him, but if we don't, I'll carry the show for the rest of the way. But those are just some of the things that are little known about in this culture, in this society, and also in the industrialized world all around, is we do not understand how even Christ, how he manifested and miraculously brought forth a basket of fish and loaves, and how that was instant manifestation, and how manifestation itself works with the projection of thought, your intent, what it is that you place and visualize. And also, his being a master and also God incarnate, of course, he was able to manifest instantly. But the way it works for us as co-creators with the Most High and with God, having that connecting link, that aspect of Christ within us, that the way that we manifest is by visualizing, having intent, placing our focus, our effort, our actions in accomplishing goals, which step by step lead us into being able to manifest our ideas and bring to reality those things which had once been idea, and only in the spiritual, but that we can manifest from the spiritual and from the ethereal and bring it into the reality as far as the physical, and that things work like that whether you are conscious of it or not. Because even if you are creating in ignorance, say you're a person that does not have realization as to your co-creative capacity and your ability to manifest in such way that if you are harboring negativity, or if you're evil in one way, that you service self and you seek to gain or to succeed at the expense of others, that you trample over your fellow brother. Are you there, Robert?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know what happened there. I keep getting kicked
Yeah,
off.
I don't know as well, but let me finish this real quick. And so all of us are manifesting on some level, and if you don't have realization and you are acting out in evil, well, then that evil is going to multiply and come back upon you. And that in creating out of ignorance, sometimes you're going to repeat the lessons that you are keep knocking your head against, because you have no idea as to how the law of attraction works. But anyways, go ahead and finish your thought, brother.
Well, I mean, just to make a long story short, what I'm saying is that the typical explanation for all of these stories is that they were made up after the fact. And what I'm saying is that it's probably the other way around. All of these stories existed, and so that people who were compiling gospels at the time felt free to sort of pick and choose. And that's because there was a plethora of these stories
Right.
at the time. Just like there were lots and lots of other sections of the gospel that Luke seemingly left out, that Mark and Matthew and John seem to cover. It's because there was an abundance of these stories, and not that these were later, manufactured stories. So, and especially when you understand them on the level of the parable, they all make sense on the level of the parable. They're all like parables. They're all telling a spiritual story. Now, as for the Nag Hammadi codices, one thing that you got to bear in mind is that this is somebody's personal private collection. Everything that's in there, I believe Plato's Republic is in there. There's certain kinds of things that are in there. And it's a little like the Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, some of the stuff that's among the Dead Sea Scrolls isn't strictly speaking scripture per se. That you have a few little odds and ends or whatever. But putting all of that aside, the kinds of source material, their creation stories, and those kinds of things that are in there. And there was also wisdom, such as the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Truth, the Gospel of Thomas. Now, I've actually gone through great pains to try and provide people with an actual understanding of the Gospel of Thomas. If you go to my YouTube site, or if you go to scriptural-truth for that matter, you'll find, if you reference Thomas understanding the Gospel of Thomas, unlocking the Gospel of Thomas, I've done a series with another YouTube user in his Word 2, describing and unpacking that and trying to detail from a parabolic aspect just what it is that Jesus is trying to say. I mean, like I give you an example, one of the first things he says is that he who comes to find the meaning of these words will not taste of death. And so it's a series of riddles that you have to figure out, like starting with that one. It means that death, as he defines it, is not understanding the meaning of these parables, or in other words, not understanding the secret parabolic language of things. And so when he talks about death, he's talking about a spiritual death. And so the book itself, and you'll find this is true with all parabolic books, is that if you see it strictly on the physical, or you somehow miss out on the parabolic aspect of the book, you are in a state of death. Therefore, the idea is that you come to spiritual life when you're able to unpack all of this meaning and apply it across the board. And see, that was the other thing we talked about earlier in a conversation before we came on the air. We talked about how it was that there was this common language of parables that underlied the canonical materials, as well as the so-called apocryphal / pseudepigraphal / whatever you want to categorize it books that for example, if you understand the language of the parables, and that's really a story for a whole other show. In fact, we did a show before, maybe we could reference it, where we kind of unpacked that a little bit. But the long and the short of it is, you don't actually have to pick and choose, believe or not believe. The key is to understand. The key is to be able to see on a spiritual level, with your spiritual eyes, what it is that's being said. There is a coherent, cohesive, consistent usage of words and a corresponding spiritual meaning that is attached to these words that basically amounts to a common language between both canonical and non-canonical material. And once you're able to discern that the message underneath both stories, both sets of stories, amounts to a common language, then all of these barriers and all of these questions tend to go away. Because if you're seeing that language in this book, then the very least you can say about that book is that whoever compiled, composed, whatever that book, they were aware of that spiritual language and wrote in accordance with it. And ultimately, it is that spiritual language that frees us from the bonds of the flesh. You know, just like we talked about earlier, why would you want to bathe Jesus and then pour the bath water to cure a disease of the flesh, right? Because it's the water, you know, that we are cleansed by the washing of the water of the word, right? That is a metaphor, and you see that water and word are sort of interchangeable. So once we accept these scriptures and then we add them to the logos or to the body of scriptures that we already have, right, then that cures the disease of fleshliness, right? And so you start to see a little bit in between the lines, and you sort of pull away the curtain. You sort of you pull away that veil that stands between you and understanding things in their parabolic aspects. And so when you understand that language, a lot of what you see in the Nag Hammadi codices, a lot of what you see in Thomas, again, if you're interested in seeing that further, I've exposited that fully in several places and in several occasions, and you can find all that at my YouTube site, Apocryphal 1970, or again at scriptural-truth.com. I think it's really, really eye-opening, and it's definitely worth the time and the effort. I think there's even a PDF there where you can kind of look and see where I've put in parenthetically how you arrive at each of these understandings, and how basically from beginning to end you can follow that, and you'll start to, again, like I said, you'll start to pull away the veil, and it'll become a whole lot less mysterious and esoteric and a lot more real to you. And you know, so I mean, it has to do less with belief than it does with understanding, you know, and that's basically at the heart of what we call Gnosticism, is seeing with your spiritual eyes, having that confirmation. It's not so much a subjective thing anymore. It's more objective. And it becomes more clear as you read it that there are prophetic aspects to it that unlock, that once you've unlocked them, you see that if this book is 2,000 years old and it's telling of things in terms of parables that are going to happen over the next 2,000 years, for example, and now 2,000 years later, you're able to exposit them according to a consistent set of rules, and they do speak of things that happen within the church and that happen within the world. You see them as prophecies that have come to pass, but you begin to see what you're looking at is things that they're couched in earthly terms, things that are packed away in earthly terminology, waiting for a day, waiting for a time for them to be understood and realized in their proper light and seen in retrospect after everything has come to pass, so that you know that God is who he says he is and has the power that he claims he has. And again, you end up with all of these extra scriptures, which is like pouring water, if you will, over the existing scriptures. So you begin to see why you need to believe some of this stuff, because you understand what it is saying to you. And so it becomes clear that it's not a matter of picking or choosing. It's not a matter of personal belief, like whether you want to believe it or not. It's more a matter of, what does it say? How does it translate? And that's at the heart of what it is that I'm trying to do. Structurally, the book hangs together and tells a consistent story. That's structural evidence. When you look at each of the individual components in terms of their parabolic meaning, that's when you really come face to face with that whole other aspect, that they tell a story on the level of the flesh that is consistent, and they also tell a story on the level of the spirit, which is also consistent, and it's more thorough with the addition of more materials. And so what you come to realize is that the early church, there was a pouring out of the Holy Spirit. There were many, many witnesses, many, many different prophets, and some of them were marginalized, some of them were cast aside, some of them were deemed heretics, and so on and so forth by the powers that then were. But when you see it with a cool eye, and when you finally put on those spiritual eyes and gain that spiritual vision, when you clean your eyes out with the eye salve, so to speak, as Jesus speaks of in the book of Revelation, then you begin to notice these things. Then you begin to become firm in these beliefs. They become a lot more real to you, and you realize that there's so much more to it.
Yeah, we'll have you on again in a month or so, and we'll pick it up from there. God bless all, and remember that the Gospel of Thomas says that the Pharisees hid the keys to the kingdom. All right, brother. God bless you.
All right. God bless you,
Night.
brother. Bye.